Thank you so much, Aishwarya, for the introduction. I'm really humbled. And thank you, Zinnov, for the platform for speaking today. I hope my voice is loud and clear.
Yes, you're loud and clear, Sushil. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So last week, I was talking to one of my friends, and I was explaining him about how virtual reality has been really used in our industry. And I think my friend was really perplexed of what we are doing in the gaming industry. So as of date, even with the advancements that we have in the virtual reality, it's still been looked at as a gaming platform. So today we'll probably try to shift the paradigm and try to understand how virtual reality would be utilized to accelerate the product development process. So without any further ado, let me try to quickly share my screen here. And I'd like to wish a very good morning to all of you and a very warm welcome to today's session. Great. So let's deep dive. I'll be talking about a few topics today when we are speaking on this area of virtual reality technology. This is a short and sweet agenda for today. We'll be going through the overview of what we call XR. There are multiple terminologies which are used in the virtual reality domain. We'll look at why basically any product development industry should use VR. And then we'll be talking about exactly deep diving into the technology itself and the application areas that you could have from multiple product development domains. And we'll be closing with a summary. Okay. Now, talking about virtual reality, there are three different terminologies which are very commonly used. The first one on the left you see is on the augmented reality, right? Now, augmented reality, as the name suggests, it kind of augments the current reality. So this is a platform where you can embed or you can have virtual objects being displayed over the physical surface where there is no interaction, but it is just an overlay of digital objects which could help you in multiple processes within the product development area. And this has been very effective in the training and the development space, right? The second in the middle, this is the major theme of today's session when we are talking about virtual reality. Now, virtual reality in an essence, it talks about virtual and reality. So it's a blend where you have the real world immersed into the virtual domain, where you will have an experience like of a product, like you would have in an actual product when you have it physically available. So it is a completely immersive technology where the user itself is completely hidden from the real world, right? And that's where the power of interaction, the power of immersive experience comes into play. The last, which is an upcoming technology where we talked about mixed reality or hybrid reality, it's an amalgamation of both these technologies, the virtual and the augmented reality, where you have the digital objects, but in this case, the digital objects also respect the boundaries of the real world. So you have a seamless interaction between the digital and the immersive world with the physical world. Okay. Now, talking about the evolution of or the journey of virtual reality itself, we are still talking about how it could be implemented into multiple domains. But it would be surprising to many that the initial evolution of virtual reality dates back to in the early 18th century, early 19th century. Now, in 1838, the first evidence of virtual reality came into existence when Sir Charles Wheatstone created its sensoroma, the stereoscope. And this is where the initial phases where you had a very simple technology which gives a 3D effect came into existence. Later, in 1956, Helic created a big machinery which was called the sensoroma. It had the 3D visualization, it had multiple sensors, it had the 4D sensors effects into place, which is deemed to be the ancestor of the current head-mounted devices. And this was a bulky system, but very analogous to the current head-mounted devices that we use in our industry right now. As we went into the 1970 to the early part of 21st century, we saw a rise of multiple companies venturing into the virtual reality space. And it was almost up into the peak in the hype cycle there. And slowly, we also saw once it started to have application in different industries, the hypes started to decay slowly. And that's where the whole paradigm of virtual reality shifted. And in the earlier 21st century, around 2010, we had Oculus coming up with its first VR gear, and that's where the commercialization began, and the race for commercialization of VR started with multiple big brands like Facebook, like Googles of the world, and HTCs of the world. And now, if you look at, you have different options of VR gears, which could be available at a very cost-effective price, which could be utilized for your own product development process. Now, talking about the market trend, now I think people would imagine what exactly it means about this industry, right? When we are looking at the current in 2021, this industry is already around $37 billion. It's a huge upswing, and the projection that we have for 2025 next 5 years is around threefold. So that's a growth of around 25% CAGR. And you would see the application of many of these virtual realities, not only in the product development space, not only in the gaming space, but also helping and transforming people's life as we go into the next few decades. Now, I think we spoke about virtual reality as a technology. We talked about how it evolved. Now, why exactly and you should be using this virtual reality into your product development process? So the image on the left, it typically, I hope many of you can recognize that. It essentially talks about a product development process where we have very less requirements at the initial part of the development process, and we have not been able to validate those requirements. Plus, if you look at, many of these knowledge gaps are still persistent till we have the design freeze. And that's where you will see the curve picking up into the later phase, where we get into multiple reworks. We get into areas where we invest a lot of cost to accommodate all those reworks. And what it also means that the workforce or our employees are frustrated, are disengaged with the overall process, right? Now, when you look at the right-hand side, that's an ideal development process. And I mean by the word ideal because it's not always possible to be exactly in that zone that is being shown in the curve here. But if you really look at this process, and many industries are being successful doing it, many of those requirements that we have are being validated upfront. And before the design freeze, you are able to have a very good cross-functional verification, cross-functional integration of all the requirements that you have in place. And then, as you see, the cost as well as the effort and the time required as you go post the design freeze is less, and we have a very smooth operation or very smooth development process as we go post the design freeze. And that's where we'll have a better engaged employees, better motivation to our employees. Okay. Now, how do we do that? When we spoke about the overall development process, and as these curves replicate, as you go later into the design process, the cost of changes exponentially increases, as well as the opportunity for any design optimization decays very rapidly. So if you look at the green balloon here, that's essentially the space where virtual reality has to be used. And this is where you have to make sure that you're having the right use cases for the virtual reality that could save you a lot of cost. It could save you time and also ensure that we are first time right with the product design. Talking about the multiple potential opportunities. Now, while the virtual reality platform is domain agnostic, you can apply it to almost any industry. We could talk about a few areas where the application of virtual reality would happen in your product development process. The first is the requirements verification. Now, all of you know, most of you would have been involved in the requirements gathering through consumers. Now, many of those comes either through a survey or through a certain discussions or interviews. Imagine a scenario where you could able to show your product an immersive experience to the consumer many months before the product is actually hitting the market, right? And even many months before you are actually having a design freeze for the concept. This could really give you a significant leverage in terms of how the consumer understands what the product would look like when it is into production. Not only the form, but also interact with the functionality of the product. And that is where you would get multiple cues from the customer to understand if there could be any requirements for changing or any requirements for any altering of the concept that you are working on. Okay. Talking about the second application, which is the benchmarking and the innovation. Now, many companies are looking at competitive benchmarking. VR could give you a powerful tool to have an immersive discussion with not only your own product, but comparing those products with the competitors and doing a best on best analysis of different features and understanding where are the opportunities to have a design optimization plus a venture into intellectual property areas and create ideations around both from an innovation perspective as well as from an cost out perspective. Now, this is mostly an application where we have which will give you a significant leverage in terms of how you are positioned against your competitors. Talking about the third area, which is the conceptual design, this is an area where you could be looking at multiple concepts upfront. And this is an area where, again, as I mentioned, we could not only interact with the form or how the design looks like, but using the VR tools, you can also interact with the function of the concept design. And this would help you to understand, okay, which of those concepts are really in line with the end requirement that we have starting from the consumer. Talking about the fourth area, this is where I think performance simulation is already now a very established domain in almost all industry verticals. But imagine if you are able to superimpose the physics or the outcomes of the simulation onto your product itself in a real world scale. That's where we have a power of virtual reality, which could superimpose the actual model in a real dimension with the animations of the simulation, that you can really see how the flow is working or how the strength of a certain area really behaves. And it will also help you to trigger some of the discussions in terms of how you can optimize to achieve the right performance or right attributes, and also help you to have the right level setting for some of our parameters there. The fifth area is one where you are really looking at the manufacturing, the assembly piece using this technology. Now, I think most of us know, right in the early concept development phase, we are probably not even thinking about the assembly pieces or how a workforce sitting on the assembly line would really look at the assembling of this product. This is where you actually could front load many of those risks and mitigate and have a solution for those problems very early on, right where you're on the concept stage. Now, imagine on the assembly line, try to assemble something where he has a lot of stress while doing that operation. Now, you could understand all those aspects using this technology early during the concept development phase itself. And rather than having a band-aid fix later into the assembly line, we could include all those finer tweaks into the design itself. And this will also help you move towards the world-class manufacturing. Now, talking about the sixth area is on the training and the communication. Now, we are all, in this current era, we are all dealing with a lot of attrition. We have people change over. We have new employees coming in. We have a lot of workforce who may not have exactly the knowledge of the product. Now, in many cases, we have the product physically available to help the employees to understand how the product or have a look and feel of the product. But in multiple cases, you might not really have the product in place. The virtual reality technology gives you a lot of means. Just using your current CAD models and having our employees interact with the products, look at exploded view, look at different interfaces of the components itself. This could really help to accelerate the induction process itself. Okay. Talking about the seventh, the area which is the service and the maintenance. Now, imagine many of when you're talking about the product development, the service and the maintenance comes at the very fag end, or it's a sort of a consumer facing end of the whole product development. While the product development is going on, if we are able to onboard the service engineer itself or the service team itself to understand how exactly we are looking at the serviceability aspects right when you are into the concept development phase itself, this can really help to resolve multiple challenges that you face post-launch or after-sales support, and ensure that you could be saving big on the cost, and as well as making sure that you have maintained the brand image in the marketplace. The last but not the least is the marketing and the branding. Now, one area of marketing is definitely understanding how whether the product would look into the when any consumer sort of interacts with the product. Using virtual reality, you can have very photorealistic, real world like renderings, which could help the marketing team to understand how the product would look like and whether it is in line with the voice of the consumers that they have received from the market. And using some of these technologies would help also establish your organization brand as a tech savvy organization. Okay. Moving on to the next slide. Now, essentially, we are talking about three different phases of product development. Now, when you look at the extreme left, this is where you would have mostly the concept development phase, and you can look at multiple other areas of interaction, either with the marketing teams or with the voice of the consumers, to ensure that we are having the right concepts at the start of the product development itself. Now, when we are talking about the design validation phase, this is an area where you would have the design and the development sort of freezing, and you would be entering into a concurrent engineering phase where you would have the lights of the process as well as the design amalgamating to understand that we are in line not only from the product development itself, but also from an process or from the manufacturability and the assembly aspect of things. And the last part is the product validation. This is an area where you would have your sales teams, your maintenance teams, make sure that they are on board fully with the product and they understand the product completely, so that whenever they are interacting with the consumers, they will be representing and able to solve most of the problems in the field. All right. So now we'll get into the specific use cases of the virtual reality technology. So this video, when you look at, there are multiple concepts where you can see are being displayed like a showroom to understand which of these concepts are in line, both from a form as well as a function are in line with the requirements of the consumer. Now, this could be one potential application. The other applications could be, as I talked about, the competitive benchmarking. This may also be multiple products from the competitors and how you understand the different features or the differentiation within each of these competitors with respect to your brand itself. Also, when you're talking about the training piece, you could have your employees understand the whole functionality of any of the products without the products being really available or physically available in your office. Okay. So talking about the next use case, this is an area, and this is more so from an augmented reality perspective, where as I talked about, it overlays all the digital aspects onto the real world. And this is a very powerful tool. If you can look at the video here, this is a video which helps or which has an assisted assembly process for the worker working on this console assembly. And if you look at all the steps, all the areas being highlighted in this video, it guides the worker to make sure that he is assembling the right object in the right place. What this also means that we would have the first time right process, even if the employee is very new to the organization or the worker is very new to the manufacturing line. This will ensure that we are moving from a person-based approach to a systemic approach. Okay. Now, talking about the third case study, which is mostly, and I mentioned about the performance simulations and the overlaying those performance simulations onto the real scale product itself. This visualization will really help to understand how the different aspects of physics, whether it would be the flow, or whether it would be the thermodynamics of the products, or it could be any other attribute of physics that we are looking from a your product itself. So this will really help to understand if you are able to make certain tweaks or small changes into the product, how this will really impact onto the different attributes that you're understanding from a performance simulation. The last use case, we talked about the assembly process itself and how we could really front load some of the challenges that we could face during the assembly process much early into the concept design phase itself. Now, this is one of the areas where the worker is trying to have a scan of the motor barcode. And typically when the barcode is assembled, we don't take into account sometimes the actual way a worker on the line would interact with this barcode. This project has really helped us to create a lot of cost avoidance, where we had looked at, while doing this operation, what could be the different fatigue, different stresses that could be generated when the worker is doing this operation. And this has really helped us to find a sweet spot for the barcode, which has not only helped to optimize the process, but also ensures that we have a safe assembly environment for our workforce. Okay, so now we get into the summary of the entire technology implementation into the product development process and how it has really helped, or it can really help you to accelerate your product development process. But it's not a magic recipe that could solve all your problems. When we are talking about the digital transformation, there are three key elements which has to go hand in hand to ensure that you are really moving into the right direction. The first and the foremost, which is the heart of the whole product development process or any organization, is the model-based systems engineering. Now, this essentially helps you to make sure that we have all the requirements gathered into a single position. Plus, we understand how the requirements flow in from the system level to the subsystem, to the modules, to the components. And they are seamless in terms of the requirements and how you would validate that using either your virtual or your physical test techniques. So this is the key when we are talking about any virtual product development process. The second most important is, how do you really verify? Now, system, as I talked about, the performance simulations have been into existence and now they have been heavily used to accelerate the product development. This is very powerful to really front load all the issues or the knowledge gaps that you have and make sure that you are resolving it. Plus, you will be able to optimize most of your concepts very early on into your design process and then ensure that you have a first time right design. Now, this is, if both of these are viewed together as a fabric, along with the virtual and the augmented reality that we talked about, you are all set to have a digital transformation in your industry and also ensure that you are moving towards a virtual product development process. With that, I would like to quote Abraham Lincoln here: the only way to predict your future is to create it. And virtual reality technology gives you all the tools and techniques to make sure that you take control of how you would like to pave the future canvas for your organization. And I truly believe the future is virtual. With that, I would like to end my talk today and really thank you all for listening. And I would like to open up for questions here.
Great. Thanks a lot, Sushil, for this insightful session. We definitely have a lot of questions and we encourage our audience to keep dropping in their questions in the chat box to keep the conversation going in. For the ones asking us for the presentation or recording of the session, please drop us a note to events@zinnov.com. We'll keep you posted on the same. With that, let's just get started with the questions, Sushil, so that we can pick your brain on it.
Sure.
We have a question around, can you provide, I think you did give us few use cases while you're explaining the things. So they were asking that, can you provide any more use cases of VR and AR for a software-based product development or solution? It could be in terms of the software simulation or demos.
Right. So when we are talking about any virtual reality product, the premise we talked about, the mixed reality itself, I think that is where you would have a lot of benefit when we are talking about the software piece itself. Now, there are different simulation techniques already available for a software development process, but if the power comes from when you are able to interact with those software options on your product itself, and that is where you have many of these software people who probably have not been interacted with the product itself. And they are, I mean, if I talk about from an appliances domain, Some of the software side may have relatively lower knowledge on the product. Now, this is an avenue which will give us a lot of leverage in terms of understanding how your software really triggers a certain operation onto the physical product. And that's where the knowledge and the learning will build up.
Correct. So there's a question around how feasible is virtual reality in wiring harness assembly simulation. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's a great question. And in fact, the wiring and the harness is a very good use case, which can really help you to reduce a lot of complexity. It could help you to save a lot of cost. And in fact, we have been implementing the same in our virtual reality platform as well. In fact, there are multiple softwares available currently, which could also help you visualize the wiring, how it will behave in a real world. So if you hold the two wire pieces in your virtual reality and environment, it would sag like an actual wire would do. And this would give you a lot of means to have a real world feel when you route your wiring and harness around the product. And this will also help you to understand and optimize how you can have the more optimum channel of wiring, plus how you can save cost onto the wiring itself and make sure that you're using the right have a sort of a modular approach with the wiring, which could save you a lot of cost long term.
Got it. So is there any suggestion on the software that helps creating the simulation scenario for product development, engagement, or training? Is it mature enough to create the required content? What are your suggestions based on your experience?
There are. In fact, many of you, if you have not interacted with the virtual reality platform, I'm sure you would be in for a surprise. There are enormous capabilities that are available. In fact, just with your own CAD model that you have, you can easily transform those into a virtual reality platform and also do multiple operations. So it's not anymore a technology which is far away. It is something which is available, and you have multiple softwares. I couldn't name any one of them, but there are in fact multiple softwares, commercial softwares available in the market, which could suit your organization and it could really add value to your company.
Got it. So specifically, is there a tool or a software that is being used to create this VR and AR outputs?
So there are multiple. If I have to name a few, there are multiple softwares from the ESI group. There are from Autodesk, the one which is called ICIDO. There are the one which is called VRED from Autodesk. There's another software called Virtualis, and just to name a few. But there are multiple commercial softwares which are available. Now, each of these softwares, like even in your performance simulation softwares, each of these softwares have their own strength. So if you just Google in, I think there is an enormous amount of data already available, as well as there is a guide available for how to pick the right VR platform for your organization. So yes, there are multiple softwares available, and they are currently now with the competitive world, they are also available at a very reasonable price, I would say.
Got it. So what is the resource requirement to create a library or environment for virtual reality?
Good question. I think it depends upon what we are trying to do. See, when you are using any virtual reality platform, it is always important to get the use case right, because this is not a platform that we would use just for the sake of implementing it. We have to really figure out what is the right use case. And if you're able to figure out the right use case, you will able to create a very big impact. Now, the amount of resources, the amount of time, it would depend on what specific use case we are trying to do. But if I talk about a small product model kind of transformed into a virtual reality environment, even your design engineers who specifically work on the CAD with a small amount of training can easily do it, right? And it depends upon the amount of library or the magnitude of library that you would like to build. But it is an activity which is doable. And believe me, once you are embarking on this digital transformation, the amount of benefits that you would get long-term are enormous.
Got it. So based on your experience, are there any benchmarks for using these VR platform to ensure that the latency is within certain parameters in order to deliver an optimal experience?
See, I think when we are talking about the latency and the optimal experience, I think this is more so important for a gaming industry, right? But when we are talking about the product development process itself, I don't think so it matters a lot. The most important point, as I mentioned, is the right use case, the right cross-functional team. involvement while, or having those reviews virtually, that could really benefit you long term. So the current softwares and the current infrastructure that we have in market, they are very powerful. You have very minimum latency that you could see, and you in fact can even help your company to find out the right use cases to save a lot of cost and have the first time right product out into the market.
Got it. So this is more of in terms of how VR really gives a real life environment for wiring harness like bending, sagging, and etc. Based on your experience, as you were explaining us few of the use cases, let us know how much it is closer to a real life environment.
See, I think as I talked about, like similar to the performance simulations, which has evolved over the last century or so, we will still, whether it is there yet, no, I think we still have a little margin in terms of improvement. So similarly, the virtual reality is in the current phase, I would say it's probably just a decade old, where it has been heavily used into the product development phase itself. And the environment is very agile. It is evolving on a daily basis, and you could see multiple new platforms coming into the play. But if I really talk about the experience that you would have using a virtual reality platform compared to a real life, I would say it will be pretty close. It could be around as close as maybe 70% of what you would feel into the real life itself.
Got it. So for augmented reality, the model alignment is done initially, and the challenge comes once we change our position, right? Because the tracking gets lost. Do we have a matured software that retains the real-time tracking?
It is, as I mentioned, there are multiple software, commercial softwares available, and this is actually not a problem because it identifies the objects or the real world objects, and it could be tuned to make sure that the object recognition is done well. And even if you change your positions, once you are back to the regular position, it adapts to the situation. So believe me, as I mentioned, probably if you would have not used those packages yet, I would really encourage you to at least have a demo or a trial of these areas with the right use cases that will really help you to explore and understand how this technology works.
Absolutely. Have you tried exploring metaverse using VR and AR?
Yeah, I think it's as I mentioned, metaverse is still right there into the very initial phases of the Gartner's hype curve. There are different understandings of metaverse that each person has, on leverage. Although when we are talking about the mixed reality, this is a step which will take us closer to the metaverse. Are we there yet? I don't think so. I think it's decades away to be, at least I would say a couple of decades away to have real world applications in terms of either into the product development space or even changing individual's life. So it will take a little bit of time, but the technology is developing really fast.
Got it. So as we talk about the metaverse, going to take a couple of decades to catch up to the speed. It's also the case with VR, right? Though you have called out multiple use cases in terms of its utilization across the various assembly and manufacturing line, do you see potentially a shift in VR in the near future, or do you think it's going to take its own time in adapting to the entire process?
So if you see, I think the whole paradigm or premise around VR has always been gaming, and that's where many companies are apprehensive to really utilize, because few people feel that it could be misused just like a gaming platform, even in the corporate sector, right? It's all about setting your priorities right. And if you just browse the web, you would see numerous big industries which are really using this technology to save a lot of cost, have the first time right products, and make sure they are faster to market. Now, whether it is there yet, the application percentages, probably not yet. But as I showed you some of those projections of the market is really probably going to get threefold in the next 5 years. And if I relate it back analogous to the performance simulations, which it was probably maybe 2 decades ago, we had this similar sort of apprehension whether is this the right technology, whether it will give us the right output. But the most important thing is to set your minds around what could be the real use case. It will not replace the physical world activities that you will do. It will help you to create value, or it will help you to enhance the current processes that you're doing. So if you're able to probably have the right mindset while using the VR technology, I think you have seamless opportunities on how it could be applied to your product development process.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shah, sharing your thoughts on this, Sushil. The expense. So we talked about the cost and we talked about the expense of creating a VR application. But you also know that it largely depends upon the integrating optics with high accuracy, and it takes a large volume of investment, right? In that case, how optimal is it to use VR for a product development? I also have a follow-up question to it, but I'll let you answer this one.
Sure. Now, again, I think this is to a short answer to this is it is still a stereotype. Okay. When you talk about large investment, it is not as large as people feel. It is very similar to maybe investing on some of the performance simulation softwares that we already have. Probably it could be slightly lower in some cases as well. But as I mentioned, if you are able to have the right use case, the ROI could be as less as maybe 6 months to a year. And if it still takes time, to make sure that you are having the implementation right, it could be even max to maybe 2 to 3 years. But in a long-term perspective, if you are able to get the right use cases, if you are able to make sure that you are having the right cost avoidance using this technology, it could really show you tangible benefits into your development process.
So there's a question in line to that, right, Sushil? So when we talk about the virtual reality being added on to our multiple processes, so certain companies find it a lot more easier when they're doing it in the pilot phase, but it becomes a lot more challenging when it becomes a full-fledged implementation, right? Mm-hmm. So based on your experience of doing it in Whirlpool, how much of difficulty or how much of challenges that one can comprehend before getting into this entire process?
So typically, when we are talking about the the process itself, right? It all, as I mentioned, it all starts from having the right mindset and the right use cases where you can really apply this. The benefit comes when you are able to leverage this much early on into your design process itself. Now, either into the pre-architectural level decisions or the pre-concept level decisions, that's where you will see a lot of value. Although you could still implement that into any of your, any of these phases where you have already locked into the design itself, but you'll probably not get a lot of value using this technology. It will just be an implementation for the sake of implementation. So what we have seen here in Whirlpool, the value really gets created when you are in the initial phase of your concept development. And that is where, if you are able to amalgamate all the requirements that would come either from the marketing or the voice of consumers, as well as the voices that you have from your manufacturing and the assembly line, if you are able to integrate all those risks and ensure that your design is robust to all those scenarios, that's where you will ensure that you will have less rework later into your development process, and then you will be more faster to the market.
Got it. So let's just take a step back here, right, Sushil? So we are just going back to a place where how did you build your business case for this entire process, and how did you get the buy-in from the leaders? What are the challenges you felt in the very nascent stage of implementing this VR, right?
Good question. And I think it's a journey, right? It's not something that you get very excited about and then you purchase all these equipments and software, right? It definitely takes a while to make sure that you are having the right application areas for the virtual reality. And at this point of time, I think when we started off long back, at that point of time, we didn't really have a lot of use cases to show in terms of how it could be really implemented to a product development. And we have our own struggle to create our way through to the point where we are really using it into live projects. So it's a journey. I think it could be faster in certain organizations, it could be slower in certain organizations, but I think the essence is where you could now look at similar industries and how VR has been really applied to create tangible benefits. That could be a starting point to help understand, help create your business proposals and make it through to the management.
Got it. Thank you for that, Sushil. We also have a bunch of other questions around, as we are discussing about the data protection and cybersecurity. Data privacy in any sector is a sensitive matter, right? And VR is still an unknown territory for a lot of the organization across vertical. What are the companies are doing in such cases for the data protection?
Right. So I think there are multiple discussions going on with respect to the the cybersecurity or the data security related to the VR. Some of them are myths. Some of them are real challenges which are being worked on, and there has been active work which is going on in multiple industries related to this. Now, I think we have to understand this. The issue of data security and cybersecurity comes in place when you are into a public domain, when you are applying these technologies to an open market, right, where you don't have control. I think that's where the real challenge comes in. But if I have to talk about a product development scenario, it's the whole system, the whole software, the whole equipments are within your own private network. Even the clouds which services that you might be using is in your own network. So essentially your enterprise security, which is I think which I'm sure all the organization is using, that is more so sufficient for any challenges related to data security or cyber security, even for the VR platform.
Got it. So we were talking about the cost earlier. Let's also talk about, for starters, standalone headsets have limited processing power on board, right? This means your development team will need to learn how to optimize and simplify the 3D model so that they can be viewed on the headset. What are your suggestions for the same? Because you would have gone through the same journey.
Yes and no, I would say. Good question. But if you really look at the the current commercial packages that we have related to VR, you don't essentially have to rework on your CAD models to create something which is applicable to the virtual reality. So essentially, these tools are equipped to transform your CAD models into a light graphics, which could be used into the virtual reality. And these are not heavy. This is something which is now a sort of an automated process into these commercial packages itself. So I think some of that is really a myth that we need to do, a lot of efforts around really creating something different. I think the activity that you do for your own concept development or product development into CAD, the same is applicable for VR. Yes, I think there is an element of translation where your workforce needs to be trained to have those translated into the virtual reality and make sure that the environment is set up into the right way. But I think it takes less than a month or so to have your people trained on these capabilities.
Got it. So I think there's a question very specific to a type of a headset. How was your experience using Oculus Quest headset? Do you think it's user friendly?
I would not probably answer this, Praman, because I think there are, as I mentioned, with like similar to any software, each of these hardwares which have their own pros and cons. I think it depends upon the application area or the use case that you have. Now, one of the problems which any of the current headsets are, I think they are still a slave of the wired sort of a configuration where you would have a wire running in. But if you are able to have the right infrastructure developed around it, I think any of these soft headsets, whether it is the Oculus, whether it is the HTC Vive, whether it is the newer ones which are coming to the market, they are going to help you progress or enhance your journey into the digital transformation. Now, whether which headset is really applicable to your domain, I think that needs a lot of study to understand it's the right use case as well as the right implementation.
Got it. So we're talking about building the business case, I think a couple of questions earlier, right? So let's cut to the chase, right? So let's assume that as a company that you're investing in VR for the product development, when do you think a company can look into positive return on investment?
Very good question. And I think that's probably any of the business leader will ask. And that's where your business proposals typically get shot down if we are not having the right justification around it. Now, as I mentioned in the earlier question, the ROI you could look at from multiple aspects, right? You could look at it in a short-term aspect and you can look at it in a long-term aspect. Definitely from a long-term aspects, you have many more tangible benefits that once you start embarking on this digital transformation journey. But from a short-term perspective, it all depends upon how smart we are with respect to having the right use case being coined when using this platform. As I mentioned in the earlier question, if you have a right use case which could really create a big impact, the ROI could be as less as 6 months also, right? But I would say a typical time frame could be anywhere between 6 months to 3 years horizon.
Okay. Thank you so much for patiently answering these questions, Sushil. You may not be counting it, but we had more than 22 odd questions that have come out for the session, right? And
Sure.
with that, that's it we have for you today. And it was extremely thought-provoking session, which made a lot of our attendees also relook at their product strategy. We had quite a bit of takeaways from it for sure. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to host you, and to the ones who joined us today. Hope you found today's session insightful. See you in our next Zinnov webinar in 2023. Take care. Happy holidays and wishing you advance Happy New Year 2023. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.